All right, you should be good.
Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Radnor Township School District Curriculum Committee meeting for December 8th, 2020. This is a virtual meeting. First item on our agenda, introductions and administrative remarks. Mr. Bechtel?
Thank you, Mrs. Solomon. Good evening, everyone. On November 25th, Senate Bill 1216 was signed into law by Governor Wolf and is now known as Act 136 of 2020. This law addresses high school graduation requirements, testing, including Keystone exams, NIMS, and NOCTI, staff evaluations, student transportation, staff evaluation, and also provides some flexibility in regard to requirements for current and future teachers and paraprofessionals. Of note, any student who is supposed to take a Keystone exam in the spring of 2020 has been issued a proficient score on that exam. Additionally, statewide graduation requirements have been postponed, making all seniors and juniors exempt from the Keystone Pathways graduation requirements under Act 158 of 2018 that impacts seniors and juniors specifically. RTSD will be canceling the winter Keystone exams in light of Act 136, since students have been awarded a proficient Keystone score under this new law. Additional information will be provided to parents and guardians by building administration later this week. That is all.
Wow, thank you. That's big news. So has that gotten out to the students yet?
It has not. That is one of the things that the administration will be getting out. So you can listen for the cheers from all across the school district and the state, but that will be getting out shortly. So you're hearing it here first.
Great. Wow, thank you. That's very timely. Next on the agenda is public comment. I believe there is not public comment. Okay, somebody jump in if there is, but otherwise we will move on to the third item on the agenda, which is the approval of the minutes from our November meeting. Committee, yes, Ms. Goldman.
Yes, I just would like to approve the minutes, but with a correction in the attendance. Mrs. Solomon, you're listed twice. I know your presence is very important, but, and I actually wasn't listed as in attendance, and I was. So if that correction can be made, other than that, I don't see any issue with the minutes.
Well, you're eagle eyes because I looked at it and skimmed right over that. But so thank you.
So my request is to strike one of the two Lydia Solomons and add in an Amy Goldman, if you don't mind.
I think we're okay with those changes. So let that be reflected. And with that change, I believe the minutes stand as written. And that brings us to item 3.1 on the agenda. Oh, no, sorry, 3.4.1, which is the action items for our business meeting. Mr. Bechtel?
Yes. All right, so we have a couple action items for the business meeting. First, we have an approval of a contract with Kepley Behavioral Consulting, and we actually have Mrs. Lesage here, and she can speak briefly about what the contract is and answer any questions anyone may have.
Hi, everybody. So this is really an addendum to a previous contract that we had with Kepley. Kepley is a contractor that we utilize for our behavior analysis people, our board certified people. We have a full-time position that is actually held by two people, and we okayed that, I believe it was over the summer, so I'm thinking like July or August. This is an addendum, as I'm sure you're aware from the other meetings that we've all been in. We are trying to find what we call RBTs, Registered Behavior Technicians, and they are personal care assistants, PCAs, one-on-one paraprofessionals that have a little more training to work with our students that have positive behavior support plans. And they are very well versed with the ABA type analysis when we're working with our plans. So this addendum is just going to be like kind of tucked into the original one. And we're looking at getting 2 of these behavior technicians in our schools.
Thank you, Mrs. Sage.
I see Ms. Goldman's. Go ahead, Ms. Goldman.
May I just ask a question, Mrs. Lesage? Under the addendum, you have 2 other positions, the BCBAs in addition to ABAs. Are you looking for those 2 positions as well?
They were already approved. I'm thinking it was June or July, and I'm sorry, I don't have the date in front of me. But we've been utilizing them, I would say, almost as long as I've been here. So maybe we've been utilizing Kepley since 2015, 2016. We did increase the amount at that time based off of all the different things that we did with our budget. So that's why that went in June. I believe it was June or July. I'm sorry, Mrs. Goldman, I can't remember which month.
Okay.
So yeah, they were already done.
I just wanted to make sure it corresponded with the action item because I saw those 4 different positions on the addendum, but only 2 positions up for approval on the action item. So I just wanted to make sure that you only are looking for the 2 ABAs as opposed to the 2 BCBAs. And that wasn't just a
correct.
Okay.
That is correct. That's the only new item.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Of course, I am just curious as well about, so are they going to be assigned to a specific school, or are they going to be moving around as needed?
Well, they are basically assigned to a specific student.
Yeah.
So that would be in a specific student's IEP. So that is why we needed to, go out and get them.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else have any comments? All right.
All right. Thank you, Mrs. Lesage. Continuing with the board action items, we have 3 grants, gifts, or donations that we're asking to be moved forward. 2 from the high school PTO. Those are the distance learning playbook, and this was a book on teaching online that was provided as a supplement for the Radnor High School teachers by the PTO. The PTO also is funding technology fees to support 3 Radnor High School students. And then we've got a district-wide gift from the Radnor Educational Foundation, and that is for a virtual learning programs. This is earmarked as I'll say block grant of sorts for specific hybrid and virtual learning. And then we also have a new student club at the high school, Radnor Capital, run by Mr. Miller, that looks at a variety of different economic topics for students.
Is the hybrid virtual learning program something separate from what we're already offering?
Yeah, so this is above and beyond the grant that was accepted by the board last month. So this is an additional $12,000 towards virtual learning.
So is there anything more specific with regard to the $10,000 that it's earmarked for?
No, so it's actually flexible. And so the $12,000, REF went and earmarked $12,000 for the district to use to support teachers and education that's going on in schools. And again, it's kind of like a block grant in that it doesn't have any specific, it's not for a series of monitors, it's not for a USB camera. It is for us to go and identify what something we may need that's unbudgeted, come to ref and say this is what it is, and then they will expedite the funds to us based off of needs of teachers or classrooms.
So would it come back before the board then as a specific item, or is it now like you could go spend it?
So once the board approves it, we would spend it on hybrid or technology items that would support instruction in the classroom.
All right. Okay. Anybody else want to ask anything more about that? Okay, I'm seeing heads shaking. I don't know, it seems rather, I mean, it's not a lot of money and it's ref. I'm just not sure I understand. I guess it's because we're in this virtual sort of hybrid situation that they felt that you might need, technology, certain items that you typically wouldn't need in a regular school year. Is that what the idea?
Yeah, so they're looking to be responsive in 2020 and to ensure that our teachers and our students have things that may be unanticipated that pop up due to COVID. And so the thought process on REF side was the grants process for REF and the approval process for the district takes quite a bit of time. So they're looking to streamline that process and make sure that if there's something for hybrid learning that teachers need or that students need, that they can get it in the hands of teachers quickly. So this is the first time we've tried a grant like this, and it's really due to the circumstances we find themselves in. So I'll say that REF started off with $12,000, and they said, let's make sure that we provide the teachers and the students with what they need. And so, this is the first time that we've done something like this.
So are you the person that's going to decide where it goes, Mr. Bechtel? Like, are they going to approach you and say what they need?
Yeah, so actually we have a grants process where the grants would come to, a grant request would come to Mr. Dukevich and myself. And then we go through and review the paperwork. We reach out to a curriculum supervisor for whatever specific area that would be. We run it past all of the administrators in cabinet, make sure, like, if it's something like a 3D printer or something like that for the middle school. Let's say that we needed a 3D printer for a technology class because social distancing made it not possible for kids to use a 3D printer. We would run it through the building principal. We would run it through the curriculum supervisor, who would be Dr. Kearney. We would run it through technology with Dr. Hand. We would run it through the operations with Mr. Dolan to make sure that we'd have the proper electrical outlets for when we plug it in. And so there's a number of people that are in the process. And then once we get everybody on board on our end, then we send it to REF and say, hey, we've gone through this process. We've vetted it. We're good with this. This is what we're asking to be spent for this, a chunk of this $12,000. And then they would expedite approving it. And since the board has already approved it, then the funds would be dispersed very quickly.
Okay, so it's actually not that quick of a process, even though we're trying to make it more streamlined.
It will be more streamlined than it has been in the past.
Yeah. All right, thank you for, I think I knew most of that, but just wondered how this one was going to work. So appreciate that. Should we move on to item 4.2, which is the 2020-2021 Radnor High School midterm and final exam schedule?
Yes, and we have high school principal Mrs. Kevgis here with us tonight, and she's going to go through and talk about midterms and final exams at Radnor High School. So Mrs. Kevgis, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Mr. Bechtel, would it be possible to bring up the document? If not, no worries, but it would help for everyone to see. Thank you. So good evening, everyone. We've spent time as administration, we've spoken to our department chairs, our students, our student government, really taken a lot of time to look at other schools in the area and really considered all the stakeholders involved to determine what we would do with midterms and finals. it was asked of me at the beginning of the year whether or not we could cancel them, as some other districts had done. At the time, I said, I really thought that as a school, we needed to wait and see how the year went and put off that decision until we really, got into hybrid and saw how things were going. Looking at how our students are doing and how the year is pacing and all of those different factors combined, we are recommending that midterms and finals be canceled for the year. There were several factors that went into it, and if you look on the document, we can go through those. First of all, the amount of time that it would take to safely administer midterm and final exams, in a traditional manner would be significant. It would be a couple of weeks, and instructional time is something that we cherish, something in a normal year that we're always trying to capitalize on, especially with our, keystone courses and our AP exams. So the amount of time that it would take to administer them, but also the number of instructional days that we would lose in the process would just be too significant. The equity piece is a really large part in terms of giving a midterm to students that are online versus students that would be in school. There's not really a very fair way of doing that. So we wanted to make sure that we were being equitable, to all students in the building and outside of the building as well. Academic dishonesty, this is not something that is unique to Radnor High School, that's for sure. This is something that all colleges, universities, and high schools are really struggling with in this pandemic and this new virtual world. And so we wanted to make sure that, we addressed that and that we were making sure that we were, giving any kind of exam with fidelity. When we were in the spring, we first hit the pandemic, our goal was always to make sure that we were able to cover the curriculum, but also that we were able to maintain the integrity of our students and their grades, to make sure that the hard work that they put in, but not just them, but also our teachers were putting in, were minimized by this pandemic, and making sure that, we were doing right by everyone involved. So as a result of all of these conditions and considerations, we will redistribute the percentage weights. In a normal year, every quarter is worth 20%. And the midterm and final exams are worth 10. Moving forward for this year, given the pandemic conditions, we're going to equally distribute the weight amongst the four quarters, so that each quarter is 25%. One thing that we should note is that we are canceling midterms and finals again in a traditional manner. However, our teachers will maintain the ability to give an assessment if they choose, in place of that midterm or final exam to assess students. So, and that decision will be left to the teacher themselves. But my estimation would be that a significant number will be giving some sort of assessment or evaluation to make sure that our students are staying on track and making sure that they're learning the curriculum that they need to learn. Thank you.
All right. So does anyone, first of all, committee members, does anyone want to have any comments about this or thoughts? Go ahead, Ms. Dunn.
Lydia, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say Sebastian has a question, and I'd actually really like to get this to the question first.
I did have a question, if that's all right. If a teacher does decide to give, let's say, a midterm or a final, whatever they choose it may be, would they put it into, let's say, like that midterm column, or would they have to assign it to one of the quarters, like quarters 2 or 3?
No, it would be worked into the quarter, Sebastian. That's a great question.
But they would just pick one? It wouldn't be spread out evenly between all 4?
It would be an assessment as part of the quarter. It wouldn't be a designation of a midterm or final. It would just be a simple assessment. It just may be worth more points than, a normal test.
Okay.
Do we feel that we need to make a decision about finals at this point? And I could see why you would, so a student can sort of calculate, when they're going to earn points. But what if it is actually possible for everyone to be in school by 4th quarter, magically, maybe, but would we, kind of wish we hadn't made this decision? Or I don't know what the pros and cons are of making that decision now.
I think that's a great question. And I think that we always try to be reflective and look at the situation that we find ourselves in. But I think for right now, this is what makes sense. And if it's something that we have to revisit, I think we can certainly do that.
Yeah, I don't think we can go back and now say we're putting in finals. So, but I mean, I understand that, we waited to see how this was going to pan out. And so this seems to make sense now. You think that we should, decide about both of them at the same time?
Yes.
Both the midterm and the final?
Yes.
All right, Sebastian, you're probably.
He looks heartbroken, truly, between the Keystones and this. I don't know how he's going to recover.
Yeah, I'm struggling.
That's awesome, huh? Ms. Goldman, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I see what's to be gained by doing this, and I'm just curious to play it on the other side. What are you losing potentially by giving up midterms and finals? And if you're not losing anything, then out of this pandemic may come yet another approach to education that's emerged.
It's often a discussion point for educators is the value of a midterm or a final, because it is such a cumulative exam and so large and worth so much in terms of the students' grades. And a lot of educators don't feel that there's worth to it. I've always been of the mindset that, we have to prepare our students, because when they go to college or university, they're going to come up against a situation where, they're not going to have a lot of homework graded, and they're going to have, a few tests over the semester, and that's their grade. And so we need to prepare them to learn how to take tests like this, but given the constraints that we're under right now and the stress that our students feel, and it doesn't make sense to apply anymore. I think there's other creative ways to really give authentic assessments that our teachers are coming up with. And, I know one of the concerns is always, what data points do we have, right? We don't have the Keystones now. What are we going to use to measure our students? But we still have our common assessments for each of our courses that we can use from one year to the next and take a look at those data points. And, we can always look at grade distributions as well as another source of information.
Thanks. That's a really helpful answer. I appreciate all of that. I think there's even some research out there that talks about how brains tend to learn better. You can absorb more information in short concentrations of administering it, as opposed to those big cumulative exams. Maybe the colleges haven't caught on to that yet, or maybe that's just sort of limited research, but I remember that very clearly. That was something that stuck in my head, is that there is an argument that you learn better when you are given more frequent but smaller bits of information. It helps it become better embedded in your brain than doing these big summative course end assessments. So thank you. That was really helpful.
If I could just chime in. I think you said it well, PT, that there's a place for all kinds of different assessments. So high stakes tests actually can be very helpful in many ways as a way to sort of mark a place where a student is in their development. But also studies have shown that students prepare for high stakes assessments in certain ways that are beneficial for their learning. So anyway, I think overall, we're seeing that we're being thoughtful about this and being very mindful of how we use assessments, and that's always good. Thanks.
Will we be administering the AP, the standardized AP tests in the spring?
We will be, and my understanding is they're going to do it very similar to last year, where it's online through the computer.
Because I wonder if at some point, in the future, we'll get data that shows how students did. Well, I guess I was thinking we'll have data from students who took midterms and finals and how they did on the AP tests, but it's a very small sample. But then we'll have data from students who didn't have midterms and finals, and we'll see how they did. It's a small, I don't know. It's just maybe one way to sort of look at the effectiveness of it. But.
And we do have our AP score reports from last year. My hesitation, and we did, well, as we always do. My only concern was the administration of the test. They did have some issues in terms of, the computers working and connecting with the kids, and the kids losing data. And that was one problem that they really ran into. And so, hopefully they're going to fix that for this year because it was really frustrating for the students who were trying to take these exams.
Do you know anything specifically about what happened that you can share? Like what went down?
Not anything, too specific. Sometimes when students would upload, a picture of something, the picture would be lost, or, different situations like that. The AP board or the College Board rather, was really good about allowing students to resubmit work. So I will say that they were, at least diligent about that. But I think a high stakes test like that can be very unnerving to begin with. And then to have to go through all of that again, the method, they were in the same boat as everybody else, just trying to get through the pandemic. But I think that they need to refine the process a little bit for this year.
I can also add to some of the specific problems that students ran into. I think it was like the Calc BC test where, yes, they were uploading the photos and it would say like the image was corrupt and it would not upload. There was also instances of people having it all there and they hit submit, but it was buffering. And in that time that it was buffering, the time allotted to like take the AP passed. And then once it finally submitted, it said that it was late and it could no longer accept the submission. Later, they did say that you could email them afterwards, I think within like a 30-minute period or maybe less. And if you emailed them like a PDF or however you were going to submit it, that they would look at it and either accept it or not. But I think there were two tests. One of them was BC. The other one might have been physics, where they had to take it the second wave. They had to make a new test and they had to take it like in June, which was unfortunate for them.
Yes, you're correct.
They had to take the whole thing again, is what you're saying.
Yeah, a whole new version of the test.
And so is it a time test, Sebastian, or were you just given like a window to submit it?
It is a time test, but typically we would have like multiple choice questions. And this year it was more open-ended so that they would, there wasn't like, it was tougher to like cheat on them, so to speak. But it is time. It was like 55. Not that I would ever cheat or anything.
No, you weren't thinking that. I know you weren't.
No. But yeah, so they made it open-ended. So you like the response had to be from the student. You couldn't like look it up or anything. But yes, it is timed, depending on what question you ask.
Wow, I did not know all that. Well, thank you. That's interesting.
Lydia, I actually still had one question about the getting rid of midterms and finals. And I would naturally assume most students are fine with that. I know the students have known about this approach for a while. And I just wonder if any of them have complained and said, there are students who rely on that high stakes test to round out their grade and bring up things. And I wonder if anybody, and I don't think that a significant enough part of the year has gone by, but I'm wondering if you've had students who were concerned that, oh, I would have done something differently first quarter had I known it was going to count 5% more of my grade.
I haven't had that feedback.
Great. Perfect. Anyone who complains about it now is just using my question as an excuse.
Oh, there's always something to complain about. Right?
No, I just wanted to make sure nobody, to your point, Lydia, about, well, we could bring, we can't really bring finals back. I think it's true at a certain point, you need to give students certainty about what is expected of them and how they're going to allocate their grades. I mean, I happen to be one of those people in high school. I knew exactly what everything counted. And I know there are students like this at Radnor who and every grade you got, you kept it in a notebook. And I knew exactly what my grade was at any point in the year. So, this shifted things for some kids. I just want to make sure they're okay.
I might have been one of those kids too.
I suspect that about you.
Well, my roommate used to say I should spend more time studying and stop calculating my GPA. So, I think this is just a year like no other, as we keep saying. So I guess this is what we need to do. So we'll put that forward. I guess that goes through the business agenda. Is that correct for the business meeting?
That looks like it's just for information, right? So would that be something that needs to go on the agenda?
Yeah, it does not require, I don't believe it requires a vote, does it?
It says information, right?
I think it's just informational.
Okay. All right, good. That brings us to item 4.3, the diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're going to be receiving an update on that initiative.
Yes. We have Dr. Stevenson here with us tonight. Dr. Stevenson, thank you for joining us.
Director Bechtel, thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this conversation.
Anthony, as you set up and for the presentation, okay, if I jump in quickly for a moment?
Yeah, thank you. If you would do the introduction, Ms. Superintendent Batchelor.
Sure, thank you. We wanted tonight to, give a more extensive update of where we are with our diversity, equity, inclusion. And one of the things that both, Dr. Stevenson and Mr. Bechtel, both Anthony and Dan have put together, along with the other principals and administrative team, is looking at our history of where we've been with these initiatives and going back to 2015. So they're going to share today what are some of the things that we as a district and as a district community have been doing. We know that the plan has set up several advisory committees, student advisory committees, building level advisory committees involving parents, involving teachers, and we've tried, as I really commend Anthony and the team, they're trying to include as many people who want to be part of this so we can take some time to capture what is the Radnor experience. What is happening in Radnor? What impact have the things that we have done already since 2015, 16, 17, 18? What type of impact have they had on our community, our culture, in our buildings, our programs? We want to take that time to understand that so that we can build on that and build also for, where we move now, the next step. How do we move forward? So all these advisory committees are an opportunity to gather, to understand that Radnor experience. It is also that opportunity to look at data. What is the specific data, and maybe identify what are those things? This really falls under the continuous improvement that we talk about with everything we do. Whenever we have an initiative, whenever we do things each year, we always talk about that we need to be willing to evaluate it. We need to be willing to look at it and say, did it have the intended impact that we thought? What were the outcomes? How has that been perceived by students, parents, or whatever the issue is? So all these advisory committees, and you're going to see Anthony's going to get to a point where he's going to share, and Dan and the team are going to share what are the next steps. Well, the opportunity this year right now, what's most important is the listening and understanding what we have been doing as a district and really gather this data, gather the information so that we can build and develop a plan moving forward that builds upon this foundation that we already have in our district. So though we've identified pillars and goals, obviously, as we hear and we listen, and as we identify what may be problems, or we identify things that we feel that need to be adjusted or changed, some of those will start to develop and change as we go through this process. So I know that this has been a topic that I've received a lot of questions from board members in a good way. That board members are very interested and invested in our culture, in our climate, invested in what is the Radnor experience. And I just want to thank the administrative team for all they've put together in this very ambitious, ambitious process of receiving feedback from so many different community members, students, and others that are going to take place. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Stevenson. Thank you for letting me jump in.
No, Superintendent Batchelor, thank you, because your comments kind of like sets the stage for this conversation tonight, which is an update. First of all, starting off saying about the board, thanking the board again for having the strength and the foresight to take this on, this initiative. Talking about diversity, equity, inclusion in a school setting or any setting, particularly in something around social constructs, is not an easy task. And the fact that the board unanimously took a stand about this and said how important it was, and took a stand to say that it should be a priority, and challenge the Superintendent Batchelor to challenge us as administrators and as school community to move this forward, says a lot about where the board wants to go and where they want to take this community. I just want to say that, and I will talk about, as Superintendent Batchelor talked about how this is about listening, learning, and then taking the listening and learning piece to then formulate the next steps. I want to say that this is, as we will talk about this is not new work here for the conversations that we had as an administrative team. It has grown. Superintendent Batchelor won't take credit for it, but when he arrived in 2015 or whenever you arrived, I forget the number now. I'm getting old and forgetting. One of the first conversations he had was about.
It feels longer to you. Is that it? Is that what you're trying to say? Because I wasn't here then, but thank you.
Yes. But the thing is, these conversations have been going on, even if they've been private conversations. He has championed in the sense of supporting those that we'll talk about. All these things that we're talking about are things that were conversations that Superintendent Batchelor were part, Mr. Bechtel, who was then the high school principal, who was willing to take on a pilot program to expand it for the high school. And now we are now, the board has taken this on to make this a district. So I want to start off by thanking all of the folks involved, because we can't move this forward unless we have everyone involved. So what I want to start with, Mr. Director Bechtel, are you going to be the?
Yes, I will. Just let me know when you're ready to go to the next slide.
So what I want to start off with is talking about the definitions here. The first piece that we want to divide, the three things we want to understand, want to make sure everybody understands, is what is it we mean by we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion. So if we go to the next slide, please. So let me just say these next three definitions are core definitions, particularly from definitions that were developed from researchers. One of the piece, the Civil Rights Project, is one that I mostly use, in which they use a lot of work around this diversity, equity, inclusion piece. So diversity, equity, and inclusion, all of these definitions you see here are definitions that are used through best practices, researchers around this model. Of all of those, through diversity, equity, and inclusion, are the opportunities for us to come back as a district over time if we want to retool some of these terms to better fit what Radnor's long-term goals are around these terms. So while we're using these as our guidelines for our conversations with the community, with students, and with parents, these are terms that, as we go, that are fluid terms, that some of the things that we may want to tweak and add, and some other terms to best fit how it looks for our community. So, Mr. Bechtel, you can go to the page 6. Okay. So, it's starting in the summer. The board, as I said before, took the courageous stand and to say that this becomes a priority. The Superintendent Batchelor asked me to be a part of helping the administrative crafts some of the language and proposed pillars that we work from. And so from this, these are the common goals that we wanted to start with for the short-term conversations. Number one is that every family, student, and staff member feel welcome and safe in our schools. The second is that diversity is celebrated, all are included, and decisions are made using an equity lens. And in order to do that, we would use those 4 pillars as our guides, and some of the stuff that we'll talk about tonight. Pillar 1 was, becomes number 1, the most important one, was to increase student engagement and learning opportunities to emphasize the value and importance of participation of diverse students in all curricular and extracurricular activities. It is our ultimate goal here, at the end of the day, that every student who exits our schools, whether it's kindergarten, middle school, high school, that we have done all possible to give them the best support for their academic attainment and to prepare them for any occupational aspirations that they may have. It is important that becomes the cornerstone of all the work that we do. And part of the things that we're going to do is, as as I'll talk about some of the past things we do, is looking at the data, seeing what have we done well around this curricular piece, but what work do we need to continue to do? The second piece is equally as important as the extracurricular activities. I mean, while, there we have a lot of students in schools, whether it's Radnor, whether it's other schools, who find themselves on islands, social islands, and ostracized or left out for a variety of reasons. It is equally important that we believe that we should equally look at how do we ensure that we feel that every member of our school community, that welcome and safe piece is a cornerstone. Next slide, please, sir. And where we are right now with that is pillar 2 is where we find pillar 2 and 3 is that where we are right now is that we are working to increase our cultural awareness as a school community through our professional development and proposed professional development in the future. The third one is where we also are now is where we are by increasing the engagement of parent involvement and in discussions about this work, and that is through our committee's work that I'll talk about. And pillar 4 is to make sure that we have a school community that is representative of the diverse population that we serve and people will engage in the world. Next slide, please. So, as I said before, we going back, starting in 2015, we go back 5 years, and where we came here. This is work that we've done a lot of work around some of these and set some of the foundation. Starting in 2015, Courtney Portlock, who is now the assistant head of the Palm Beach Independent School, and what at the time was an independent consultant around DEI work, came in and did a preliminary assessment of our district to look at how do we design building level DEI programs. And one of the things that she worked with is both the high school, middle school, and elementary schools about starting those basic conversations around that for both administrators and staff. At the same time, the high school was working about how do we look at taking our students to a different level, and they started around the AP potential, which they identified students who had that academic skills, and then moving them into honors and advanced placement courses. By doing this, they were able to have an opportunity to take students who necessarily wouldn't have been able or wouldn't be willing to move in those courses and put those in place. They also started at the same time with students who were identified a mentoring program. In 2016, in addition to Courtney, as following up on the training that we received from Ms. Portlock, Mubarak Lawrence, who was a graduate of Radnor High School, but also a Radnor ABC alum, who after he graduated from Ursinus College, came back to the city of Philadelphia and did grassroots work around diversity, but also about academic excellence, and was one of the Radnor was one of the first organizations or schools that he worked with. And what he started doing was he brought a few things. He brought the youth of someone who was an alumni, but also someone who had an experience of who navigated their way through those academic hurdles in a school district like Radnor and found success. And he was able to come back to us and help establish some of those foundational things that we needed, particularly at the time, addressing some of the needs around our students, our Black students who found themselves in that, what I call that social island. So he helped work with the school to start the Black Student Union, and he worked with expanding the Black History Month, and also starting those whole conversations with the school administration around how to better support those needs. He came back as an opportunity. By this time, Superintendent Batchelor came on board. And one of the things that Superintendent Batchelor was real big on board when he came on board was making sure that we didn't create these isolations or segregate silos and creating these bridges. And so one of the things that he challenged us to do is to use this at people like Mr. Lawrence to expand those conversations. And so what the high school did that next year was to have Mr. Lawrence included in the high school fundamentals program, which is the orientation for freshmen and a part of their diversity training. And then moving on from there, the district was a part of the Delaware Valley Consortium of Equity and Excellence. And what that is a consortium that has close to 50 district members between Pennsylvania, Delaware, and New Jersey. And what they do is they meet various workshops at the University of Pennsylvania, talking about how do we provide academic support across the board and provide ongoing professional development for members of our school community. Next slide, please. It was from the Delaware Valley Consortium that we were able to hear and connect with Dr. Caprice Holland. Dr. Caprice Holland, who is a renowned researcher and lecturer and author around work related to DEI. She was able to work with our team to help us shore up our building. The high school at the time was the first equity team that was put in place. With that, the high school had training for through Dr. Howard Hollins, was able to do ongoing professional development for our staff, but also help our equity team and also give some groundwork for some of the other work that the high school was doing at the time. That was extending learning program that provided after school tutoring. Again, and then we were also able to have Dr. Howard, Manny Howard, who was a RHA alum, who also started talking about a Dream Academy, a Dream Leadership Academy, which was an opportunity to expand the conversation around the work that we need to do. Those became important concepts. And so while the high school became the starting point, it was not the end point, because from there were other things. So that both the middle school started their equity team, then followed by the elementary schools started the book clubs, and so that, which led to last year, which was next slide, please. And last year, all the elementary schools implemented a responsive classroom practice, which was connected to that first layer of conversation around DEI work. All of the elementary and high schools also had DEI book clubs, and all the schools participated in the DVCEE program. The Leadership Academy continued and added a Girls Empowerment Club at the high school. And Dr. Hollins provided DE training for all teachers and administrators K through 12, which is where we are now. And this year, over the summer, our administration developed a proposed DE action plan, which is the short-term plan. For this year, we, out of this to grow the long-term plan. We're fortunate that Dr. Heather Bennett provided, who is the Director of Equity and Training for Pennsylvania School Board Association, provided professional development for school board members, administrators, and staff, and provided us with consistent message about equity and about where we're going. All of our schools have DEI teams, and the school board recognized the DEI as a district goal. Next slide, please. And so when we look at the next steps for this year, there are 6 important ones. The one is that we will make sure that we want to do is this, as I talked, is to secure a DEI consultant who could assist us with ongoing professional development and staff administration. One of the people that we have been fortunate to bring on board around that has been Heather Bennett, who we've have a memorandum of understanding around some of the work we need to finalize based on conversations we're having now, and then she will start working with us more closely. The second one is what we're doing now is to convene the parent and community advisory teams and establish the student advisory committees. So one of the things that has come up out of this is, why are we doing it this way? Why are we not doing it another way? And I want to explain. I want to take a couple of minutes just to explain this. So if you go to the next slide, please, Director Beckler. I've been dealing with DEI work in some kind of forum. It's been called a lot of things for the last 20 years. And one of the things that I've found is that there are 3 particular options that you have. You either have what we call, in my world, the blue ribbon committee approach, which means that you have selected people across the board, you put them in place, and they are the people who are making decisions across the board around that, selected for a variety of reasons. And that those committees work well, because they've identified their work and they're consistent. But what we have here, when we talk about diversity, you talk about equity, you talk about inclusion, it is a very sensitive topic. And when this board decided to take a stand, it was done during a time it was hypersensitive in communities across the board. And so what we decided, and I said I made the recommendation to Superintendent Batchelor, and he supported, was that we take the organic approach, where we go from bottom up, where we look at, we go into the community and say, we want to hear the voice of the people across the board. We want to make sure that everyone, because when we talk about these topics, people have a ton of different thoughts about it. And we don't want to give any illusion or a false narrative that this was some, number one, we don't want to say this was some rubber stamp process. Number two, we don't want to say that it was just that we were biased in who we picked to be a part of it. We wanted anyone and everyone who wanted to be a part of it. And what we did is we opened it up and said, who wants to be a part of these conversations? We got over 80 some responses. And so, which tells us that people are interested to be a part of this conversation, and that we didn't want to turn down anyone who wanted to be a part of it. And so what we did, instead of taking the quicker route of having one committee, we said we'll do it across the board. Last week we did an opening conversation around the work we're going to be doing over the next few months. That was opened by President Stern and Superintendent Batchelor. We had 60 people who showed up for that meeting. Starting tonight, which I'm leaving after this to start our first of 5 opening meetings at the building. We're averaging between 15 to 25 people, depending on the school, who are participating. So what does that say? That says that people are interested, but that also says that when these final recommendations come to Superintendent Batchelor and to the school board, that we can say with fidelity that that the community had an opportunity to be participant, that the recommendations we make, the opportunities for the board then to take it at the next level for that cross community board, that I will say that people can say that it was done as a community input kind of board. So next slide, please. And here are the committees that we're doing. We have a student advisory committee that is going to be at the middle school and the high school. We're going to have school-based DEI committees made up members of the faculty and staff and administrators. We will have PTOs and parent PTO DEI advisory committees, one for each building. And we will have a district-wide DEI task force. The responsibility of the district DEI task force is to take information that's based on the conversations and input from the students, the school-based, and the parent advisory committee. Take the information and then those reviews, recommendations from those to Superintendent Bachelors and to the board for recommendations for that. And through that, what we want to do is for the next step, continue on the next steps, as I've talked about already about the student advisory piece, but is that we also want to review relevant data. As Superintendent Bash so eloquently stated in the beginning, is we want to take all these things that we've done for the last 5 years, some of the things that we've done real well, but a lot of the things we can clearly say that there's a lot of work still to be done. Take that information, look at the data, and then inform us how we can use that for our leadership team for possible programming and curriculum changes. Our goal between July and August of next year is to review those recommendations for programming and make between August and October based on what we've received over the next 4 to 5 months from these committees to make those final recommendations to Superintendent Batchelor, who will then make final recommendations to the board, and then will be a part of our next steps around long-term goals around the DEI work. So that concludes my not so brief summary of updates, but I am now will defer the floor to Superintendent Batchelor and Director Bechtel.
Thank you, Dr. Stevenson. I think, Mrs. Solomon, I'll turn it over to you. So, and then any questions or any comments from board members. So.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you very much for really just sort of getting this whole conversation started. And I think it's a good starting point to sort of review what we've already done, to define some of the terms that we're using, and to have a timeline on what we're trying to do. I'm going to first turn this over to anybody on the committee who maybe has some follow-up thoughts. Anybody want to jump in? So one thing I thought of is, Ms. Goldman, were you?
I mean, I can wait my turn till.
No, go ahead.
Anybody wants to go first. Well, thank you, first of all, for fleshing this out some more, Dr. Stevenson. And I remember watching these meetings with great interest a couple of years ago, I think, when Mrs. Kevkis brought forward some of the things she was working on at the high school. And at the time, I think it was really evident how much of a commitment there was at the high school level to get some of this work underway. And there were future steps that involved expanding it district-wide. And it seems like that's where we're going at this point. Is that correct, Dr. Stevenson, that this is no longer sort of a school-specific initiative? This is now a district-wide effort. Would you say that's correct?
I would say that Superintendent Batchelor has made this a clear mandate that this is a district-wide initiative that we are to work on.
Okay, that's great, because there's, I'm sure, a lot of work to be done with all the effort you put in at the high school level, with 4 other schools. There is diversity, inclusion, and equity to be tapped and evaluated and worked on across the district. One of the questions I have about the goals that you mentioned earlier is the first one feels to me a statement about inclusion. And the second one feels to me like it's a statement about diversity. I could be wrong, but I'm wondering if among your goals you have something that we're striving for in terms of equity.
Well, I think you, again, here, I want to reemphasize something I said earlier about how these came up to be, these terms. We use these as a universal template to say, like in the goals, it says that diversity is celebrated, all are included, and decisions are made using an equity lens. So from the equity lens, that's, how I I'm not interpret, I'm the one who wrote it. It is to say that to use equity as equally as a cornerstone of the conversation around it. Again, one of the things I was going to say is that this is something that we will probably revisit to come back. What are our long-term goals? This is a short-term goal for us to use for our initial conversation. When it comes back to the board, it will either have some changes and suggestions based on what we have from input.
Okay, great. Thank you. Because when I think of equity, the way you defined it, there are barriers that are inevitably in the way of students of all different kinds from achieving what they have a right to and need to accomplish. And so I guess part of it's going to be through these conversations you're having with the community and with students to figure out what are those barriers, and then figure out how to best either remove them or overcome them. Am I on the right track sort of with what your
I think that's part of it. I mean, I think that the students the faculty and the parent groups are to give us from their lens about what their perceptions are. But it's our duty as members of the faculty and as administration to either clarify or to validate some of those things, but also equally for us to dig deep in the data to see from our perspective, what are we doing well, but what do we have to work on? I mean, there are things that from the outside looking in that absolutely that we have to take into account, but also at the same time, we have to be looking at ourselves, looking in the mirror saying, what are we doing? What are we doing well, but what do we need to work on? So it's not just, these committees are not just to gather information and tell people to either give us a pat on the back or to be reactionary to people's input. Is also for us to look at it, take this seriously, to look at our graduation rates, looking at our kids who are included in academic places or non-curricular places across the board. And a lot of those things that to make those changes are things that we have to have conversations internally about.
Right. So it sounds like you're packaging stories that you hear in the community with data that you have access to as an administrative team to figure out where the issues are, and then decide you'll come and ask us maybe how to appropriate the right resources to be able to address those challenges that you find.
Yes.
Does that sound okay? One of the concerns that I have is that, you've been working so hard at this since 2015 and maybe before, but that's sort of where your timeline starts. Have you given thought about how to create more permanence around this that's not reliant on a particular school board or administration?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, so the goal, the goal that is, so the short-term piece when you do work like this is basically take a year to figure out what I call is you look, you learn, you listen. My triple L approach. All right. We're spending the year looking at what the problems are, listening to the people from all the stakeholder groups, and learning from those things. And from that, then we want to establish long-term goals around policies, procedures, things that will withstand and that will be here long before when I'm gone, you gone, and nobody's left but Ken and Dan Bechtel. You know,
I won't ask you how you arrived at that, but go on. That's, you know,
they're young.
it's-
They're younger than me. That's why.
But no, that's encouraging because you know you've invested. It's 2015 is 5 years ago already, and you put a lot of time and energy and effort, and a lot of the administration and students, anybody who's contributed to this has put a lot of that of effort into it. And my question was, and you answered it, how are you going to, it sounds like through establishing policy, is embed this in our district so that it's not subject to who's on a board at any particular time or who your superintendent is, et cetera. That this will have some permanence to it going forward for the sake of the district and all the students who come through for an educational experience.
Yes, I mean, yes, ma'am. This is not, we're not doing this this is not a county fair. We're here to make this a permanent cornerstone to be a part of, to take what the board has given us the opportunity to do through your energy on this to make this happen.
And I have one last kind of overarching question. I hope you hear them as this way, even though, you know, I could ask a lot of detailed questions because I'm really interested in this. But my other overarching question is, how do you envision keeping the larger community engaged in this work? This will touch everybody in some manner, shape, or form. And I imagine, although I could be wrong, that the people who are signing up to participate are people who have an interest in the work, are intrigued by the work. There are a lot of people who, for various reasons, can't or won't engage in the work. Do you feel it's important to keep the entire community apprised? And if so, what's the best way to go about engaging as large a segment of the community as you possibly can?
Well, I mean, first of all, all of your questions, or any of these questions are questions that are helpful and on par. So there are good questions. A part of the reason why we are taking the approach of this grassroots approach is to allow the parents to expand their ongoing piece to this. Our goals are to use the next 4 or 5 meetings for ourselves, but we're creating, number one, establishing co-chairs. We partner with PTO on this, even though I've kind of like taken it on in order to have the opportunity to gather information. But what we're doing is, the goal is that this becomes a ad hoc piece of a PTO or a standalone community. We want this to be something that these folks take on and from this and continue these conversations on this.
Okay, but I mean, is there, just to make sure that the community at large, whether they have the chance to participate or the desire to participate or not, is aware that this work is going on and what the findings are? Because ultimately, is that part of the plan as well?
This is going to be a very transparent piece. And one of the things is that these committees that are meeting are still open. So it's not like we've closed the committees that are the work now. I mean, we have shared this out, and anyone who's interested in attending the ones, they can always attend them. But also our goal as a school community is that we will also continue to go and have opportunities for engagement. So for instance, I have the pleasure and privilege of being the liaison of the MLK Day. And what we just had a meeting today, one of the things we want to commit to is have an ongoing series around DEI work starting in January for the rest of the year. I mean, so the goal is that either through the administration or partnership through this, that this becomes a part of our DNA on an ongoing basis, that every time we talk about anything around Radnor, DEA work is a part of in some form or another.
Okay. Well, thank you for addressing those overarching questions. I really appreciate it. And thanks to everybody who's put in the time, including the parents and students who are, I think, giving up a fair amount of their time to lend their stories and observations and ask questions to engage around this work as well. Yes,
I would agree that the commitment of all of the folks, the administrative team, the staff and parents and students who participated so far and to come. It is humbling that their interest.
Ms. Dunn, Dr. Babson, anyone else have? Yeah, Ms. Dunn.
No, I think this is great. And I really appreciate Dr. Stevenson, you walking us through this, because I read all the materials before the meeting and some of it I went, there's so much more I want to understand. So I appreciate you adding a lot of color to that as we talk through. And I do appreciate that this has been a long road. And I feel like, you know, I've been on the board for 3 of these years. It's been kind of fits and spurts. I feel like each year it's been something new, but I appreciate that you are looking to kind of not put a thread through it, but more a solid rope or a beam that gives it more support and keeps it going. And I think that there is a real element of, you know, you give the board a lot of credit, but I have seen that it's really the parents and the PTOs. I think there's been a lot of community effort in this way. I mean, even just things like the multicultural potluck dinners. I think the PTOs and the parents have been pushing this in other respects. So I think it's good that the district is finally taking that on and saying, you know what, this isn't for the outside groups to try and remind us of. This should be a core to our mission. So I appreciate you spearheading that. I just had a couple, I think Mrs. Goldman adequately covered a lot of the kind of overarching questions about how to make sure this is more permanent. I had a couple of more detailed questions. This Delaware Valley Consortium for Equity and Excellence, is that we're still a member of that? And are we actively doing anything with them? Or is that kind of something that we did that year?
Yes, we are still a member and we're actively involved, yes.
Okay. And so are we sending teachers each year to some kind of training or educational there? I know it's been tough lately.
So this year we decided that we would only have administrators or our members of the staff, like counselors or someone else who we would not require a sub. So this year was hard about the subs.
Understood.
And normalcy we'll do that, but we do have representatives who do attend.
Okay. Great. And then I guess I was trying to understand when you talk about, I appreciate you laying out the steps. It's always helpful for the board to understand kind of how things are moving, what the timeline is. Are there any plans to update the committee between now and next August or October? Will we get kind of updates?
I am at the disposal of the superintendent and the board whenever I'm asked.
Okay, I think it would be helpful for, you know, as you hit certain milestones through this process, if there's time in our agenda. I know it's a.
I'm teasing, sorry, I jumped in. At his disposal, I said, next week sounds great. Dr. Stevenson back next week.
Okay, and then I just, sorry, my battery's running down, so if I don't charge it, I'll disappear. And maybe this was kind of what you were talking about with Mrs. Goldman. In item 4, you talk about reviewing the relevant DEI data. You talked a little bit about kind of numbers that we have, and I know we talked about that in prior years when we look about the historically underperforming groups. And you're talking about community feedback. Is there other specific data that you're looking at in terms of this review with the leadership committee?
We'll look at internal data, but we'll also look at best practices to help guide us as well.
Okay. The student advisory committees, how are they being recruited for? I mean, I'm assuming there are some students who are very aware of the situation. You know, we've all got different, the students all have different interests in their thing, but there may be kids who could really contribute to this who aren't either seeing the communications about it or maybe are a little bit more shy and don't feel like they have as much to contribute. Are we making sure we're reaching out and tapping kids on the shoulder and saying, hey, I think you really have something to contribute here?
So yes, I mean, and again, you know, student piece becomes with COVID becomes a little different of how it is, but I get speak to both. For instance, for the middle school, which is new, there was the counselors and a group of teachers have been meeting to identify some initial students, and hopefully from that'll expand for different reasons. So that becomes that. The high school has already, you know, becomes a little different because, you know, over the summer, we've had numerous conversations with parents and students. So we had several students who wanted to start. So we have a group of students who want to start, be a part of the initial conversation, and then have kids join in as they want. But also they've already had some established student leaders there. But it's not to close the door on anybody. The hope is, again, as Ms. Goldman asked, is this a temporary thing? Is on part of an ongoing conversation, even though they may not. Same thing with the parent groups. We may have some parents who may start off in the first couple of months, but then all of a sudden have heard from 3 or 4 who found out about it last week. Now they're going to show up to our meeting tonight. So it's one of those things, an open door policy, where we want to have a core group that we can identify or who have self-identified. But then the goal and the ultimate goal is then that it is the type of conversations and the type of structure where people feel comfortable coming, even with different types of viewpoints. I don't want everybody at the table saying the same thing, thinking the same thing. We want people who have a diversity of experiences and opinions, but we want the ultimate goal that we want what is in best interest for our community based on the goals of DEI that the board will put in place through policy and procedures.
So, and I think that's wonderful. So to that end, it's easy enough for parents to communicate and notify them in the Radnor Reader, hey, your diversity committee is meeting this month, your diversity, equity, and inclusion committee is meeting this month at this time. But I guess that's what I was trying to figure out with the students. Will it be just in the general announcements? Is there, and I know it's harder with the virtual and hybrid, but is there a way that it will regularly get communicated to students?
Yeah.
This committee's meeting this month, and you're welcome to attend, even if it's your first time or your 10th time.
Yes, I will speak for the high school principal, Ms. Kevikas, who is on board, that is definitely to be embracive and open for students to participate.
Okay, and something similar at the middle school will be available?
Yes.
Okay. 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 No, I think that's good. I have a lot of questions, but I think that you're still in the planning stages, and so I look forward to updates and being able to pick your brain. It seems like this has been done a lot of different places, and there are a lot of different structures that work. So I appreciate you explaining we're going with the homegrown approach and building from the bottom up. I just want to make sure that as we build, we're building a solid foundation. So yes. Thank you.
And I am always available for individual conversations or questions offline as well.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Dr. Babson, any comments at this point?
Not too much. Most of what I was going to ask about or comment upon, I did in the planning meeting, but I think this is pretty exciting. This is not really something new for our district, but it is a new direction for long-standing efforts among certain leaders in our district. And so I think that it's a really good time for us to start the process of gathering information through listening. What I think of is a term called action research, which is basically the process of doing research while also reflecting and then planning for the future. And so that's this listening phase, as Dr. Stevenson said. I think of it as like the action research part, where it's very important for us to understand where we are starting with this new direction in our community, and to understand that people have lots of different perspectives, have lots of different concerns. There are lots of different kinds of diversity and different ways to include, and ways to ensure fairness. Fairness is my shorthand for equity. So I think we should all be pretty excited by this. And I look forward to seeing what this year brings for this initiative. So thanks for everything, Dr. Stevenson and all.
Well, thank you for using the academy term, because yes, this is the approach that I use. I use organic, but for the academy term, it is action research approach that I'm trying to use here.
You got it.
So I have just some comments, and then I have a couple questions as well. But So I first want to point out that you started, your chart on what's been done in 2015, but I want to point out that there were things, many things before that, and I understand many of them are attributed to Dr. Stevenson's leadership, but just one small example was that there was no place for hate, and I believe that started in RMS a lot sooner than your timeline begins. And I also, and that's just an example, but there have been, there has been interest in this. I can remember way back, and this is like the dark ages when my kids were in elementary school, there were attempts by the PTO to have committees around diversity and cultural awareness. I also want to point out that on curriculum committee through the years, I can speak for myself, there's always been interest and questions about what we used to call historically underperforming groups, and lots of concern about how they were performing and, what were we doing to address needs throughout the district for curriculum. So this brings me, though, to the point where we still have a lot of work to do. And when Mr. Batchelor sort of asked the board members, what are our goals for this year? And I said one very flippant goal, which I did mean, which was not to get sick and not to make anybody else sick. And my second goal was this diversity, equity, and inclusion piece, because I'm aware of what we have tried to do systematically. And like I said, we have a lot of work to do. And so my first question is, through all these committees, which is fantastic, I love this approach, this grassroots, let's see where we are, let's see what percolates through the system. I want to know how we're going to communicate what we find. Like how am I going to hear interesting things that happened in student committees or parent committees or even faculty committees at schools?
So self-admitted, I am not very good at that. I'm all about doing the work, getting it done, but I'm not well about putting it out. So I'm working closely with Director Dukevich and Bechtel under the leadership of Superintendent Batchelor. So I will defer to them to make sure that gets out. But I'm confident it will, but I'm going to give that one to them.
Well, fair enough. And another thing I thought of, and actually another board member made me think this, was this is an awful lot to put on Dr. Stevenson, for example.
Let me just
He's
clarify.
trying to go to school.
I just want to say, no, let me just clarify. I say I, in the sense, again, I say that only under the umbrella of a lot of other people across the board. So all the principals are running their buildings and their assistant principals, people are doing the groups. I only say that I've volunteered to help put it together and align it. So I just want to clarify, I have not been asked to take this on as be the Crispus Attucks of this project.
No, you are on a number of those committees, though.
I don't want to parse words with you. I'm just really interested in hearing what we find out, because then it makes it useful. Like if we start the conversation and then we really do something with what we're finding out. So then this brings me to kind of a more broad question. So how are we going to know, sort of throughout the process and even maybe next summer, how will we know if we're succeeding? How are we going to measure what we're doing?
That's an excellent question. We'll know. We'll have to set some goals on it. For number one, our goals right now for this year is to look at. We're using our goal based on what we've done in the past to see how successful we've been at this point. For this short-term piece for right now is to understand what people's feelings. Then for our long-term goal is then we'll set parameters around, success rates around graduation, test scores, participation. We can look at that now and say as an internal district to say, like, we look at graduation rates now, we can say, can we look at this and say that this is something that's been good? Or we can say that it's something that we need to work on. So right now we'll use that data that we currently have to establish how we feel about ourselves, about how successful we've done up to this point. But then the next phase of that would be then to set new goals to say, based on what we know what we look like, good, bad, or indifferent, here's what we need to do to improve those things. And I only use graduation rate only as one, as just an example. I don't even know, so please don't quote me saying that we've been looking at that part, but I'm saying, let's just say that we look at our students with IEPs and say that this percentage is successful. And we can use that to gauge that we should be proud of it. And what can we do to work on it? But if we find out that, we're not doing that well, we need to work on it, then that is one that we would take on. But then the next phase to that is, now that we have a list of things that we have to identify that we're going to focus on to say, here are things that we're going to work on, then we would set new goals to say what interventions we need to put in place to improve those, to make it even better.
Lydia, do you mind if I just piggyback on something Dr. Stevenson was saying? So this is something that I remember us talking about last week, and it was a topic that came up because, we want to be able to set high goals and work hard to achieve them, and then be able to agree upon a metric or some kind of way to assess whether or not we've been successful. But the way that I've understood it, and the way is how Anthony's explained it, which is that this action research, quote unquote, part of this effort right now is actually about coming up with the goals, actually using the information that we're getting to actually build them and to make them clear. And I also heard in Dr. Stevenson's reply that that it's an iterative process. It's, you reach one goal and then you kind of see where you are and you move to a different set of goals. So Dr. Stevenson, I don't know if that was clarifying or
that was aligned to what I was saying. Yes, thank you.
Okay, cool.
You say it so much more eloquent. Thank you.
And Ms. Solomon, if I could just jump in quick, I know that Dr. Stevenson is going to have to leave us. He is actually going to facilitate one of the DEI parent/PTO meetings, and so he's got about a minute before he's got to jump off. So
thank you all. Like I said, I am available for individual meetings or follow-ups for everybody. Thank you. Have a good night.
Yay. Thank you, Dr. Stevenson. Thank you. All right. I do just have one more comment. And I mean, I just want to, I guess I'm concerned maybe a little bit that I don't want this just to be, oh, this is nice and it's topical and, we're going through the motions. I want to identify how we're going to bring people along with us that maybe don't see this as a need or don't, share an interest in doing anything about this. Like, how are we going to identify, it could be that these conversations are nice and these are people that are interested in the topic anyway, but we're not touching maybe the people that, aren't on board or don't understand this or, don't think this should be a goal. Like, how are we going to bust through that? That's sort of, to put it blunt.
Well, and I think that to Dr. Babson's point earlier, what we tried to lay out here, and Dr. Stevenson so eloquently said, is really lay out the process and the timeline. And so we don't know what the end goals are going to be. As Dr. Stevenson said, it's a listening tour. And so we need to hear what the community has to say. And we've done Dr. Stevenson's provided a lot of great guidance to get feedback from our employees and from our students and from our community. And so it's really a listening tour. And then after we go and get their feedback, then the next step is digging into the data and seeing what can we see based off of the anecdotal feedback that we got from the community and from the stakeholders. What is the data telling us? And then give ourselves some time to see what are manageable goals. We don't have to do this all in 1 year. We've been, that was part of the timeline, is we've been working on this, but what are manageable, attainable goals that we can set long-term as a district? So I do think that your point's well taken, Mrs. Solomon, but I think that right now we don't have the answer to what the future goals will be. Right now, we just, Dr. Stevenson laid out the process and the timeline. And the first step for us is hearing from the community about what where they're coming from, what their lens is.
If I could just piggyback on that too, is that it's a listening and evaluation tour. Because we've been doing a lot of this work, it's listening and also evaluating where we are, and evaluating where we are based on some of the things that you heard about tonight that have been done. Take for example, I think it was 2015, we started using AP Potential. I mean, it's just one small example. What role is that continuing to play? And how has that been used? How has that evolved over time? We're going to find, as Dr. Stevenson mentioned, Anthony said, that the things that are going well, and we're going to find things that aren't. We're going to find things that maybe worked well and things that didn't work so well. So it's listening and evaluation. And I think that's how we will bring and move people along in this process.
I also, Ms. Goldman, I see you had a comment. I was also first going to ask Sebastian if he had any thoughts that came up when he heard this initiative.
I did not have anything in particular, but I think I didn't really have anything in particular.
Okay, you're ready to listen. Awesome. Mrs. McMiniman, I'm going to also just throw it to you if you had anything you wanted to offer at this point.
No, I'm good. I think that this is a really important step that we're taking. I've been part of it since it was with Dr. Stevenson when it started way back 2015 when it became more formalized. And I think it's just something we have to keep moving forward. It's a big area. We have kids that do still feel isolated, and I really feel that this has to be addressed. I'm glad that it's starting earlier. I know there are kids at our level that do feel they're on an island. So the fact that we can address it, move it forward. And I think the community involvement and the parents' involvement and hearing the students is especially important. So I like that all of these aspects are being brought into it.
All right. Yeah, thank you for that perspective. Ms. Goldman, you had a contribution.
Yeah, just hearing what everybody had to say raised one more question for me, and that is just the process maybe for ensuring that all voices that need to be heard are heard. Sometimes people are more comfortable coming forward than others. And yet there are so many different segments of our community where people represent smaller pockets of the overall population than others, whether it comes to 10% of our, or 11% of our community is identified as socioeconomically disadvantaged. We have 3% of our population are English language learners, 13% are special education students. And I haven't even gotten into gender. So is there some conscious effort to make sure that maybe people who are more resistant to sharing their stories have a safe place to tell them, so that we make sure that we get a good cross section of what all of those stories you want to hear are?
And I think that's a great point. I think that's, the thoughtfulness behind the design. It's not one committee. It's multiple committees, multiple levels, multiple buildings. I know that Dr. Stevenson spoke. We had him come and speak to the PTO presidents early on in the process about partnering with them to get the word out. So I think that intentionally, we're looking to make sure that we're hearing from various different stakeholders, and the reason that we've got a committee for every building for the employees, the reason that we've got one per level for parents, PTO, and that we've got a high school and middle school student committee is because we wanted to be invest the time to really hear from those different stakeholders. Ms. Goldman, I think it shows the district's commitment to it. We don't just have one committee that we're hearing from. We've got, 8 or 10 committees that we're hearing people's voices from. So we are intentionally trying to go and make sure that we're hearing from as many different stakeholders from as many different backgrounds as possible, and getting a cross section of what how people feel about this topic.
Great, thank you.
All right, so more to come. And I'm glad we had the time to really dedicate, quite a bit of the meeting to that. I think we're ready to move on. Is there any new business? Seeing none, is there any public comment generated during the meeting?
I don't believe, as of just a couple of minutes ago, there was no new comment.
Okay, thank you. So we are ready to conclude our meeting. I believe we're going to be having 2 curriculum committee meetings in January, but they have not been scheduled so to be determined. Thank you, everyone.